You ever really think about the dog sleeping at your feet? Or, the milk in your coffee? These things we take for granted are actually the result of one of the biggest technological leaps in human history. Seriously. It's the story of how our ancestors took wild animals and turned them into partners. And that shift, it didn't just change what we ate. It built the very world we live in today. It was the solution to one of our oldest, biggest problems, and it created a brand new world. So let's get into how it all went down.
And this is really the big question, isn't it? For pretty much all of human history, animals were either trying to eat us or we were trying to eat them. They were a threat or they were a meal. But then something just fundamentally changed. We started making alliances. This was a massive technological and social jump that completely reshaped not just our species, but the entire planet. So how on earth did we pull it off?
Okay, so to really get why this revolution was so huge, we have to go back and understand the world it replaced. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, life was, it was a constant gamble. Every single day was a fight for survival, completely defined by risk and not knowing where your next meal was coming from. This really lays out the problem our ancestors were up against. On one side, you've got the hunter-gatherer life. You never know if you'll find food, you're always on the move, and just making it to the next day is a huge risk. And on the other side, the agricultural life we eventually created. Stability, settled communities, security. Animal domestication was the technology that built the bridge from one to the other.
But before we could run, we had to walk. See, hunting those giant mammoths was super unreliable, so humanity adapted. Archaeologists call it the broad-spectrum revolution. Basically, we expanded our menu. We started going after smaller, easier-to-catch animals, and gathering way more types of plants. This was a huge first step in managing risk, and it got us thinking, what if we didn't have to hunt our food at all?
And that thinking leads us right to our first and maybe most incredible animal partnership. Long before we were herding sheep or raising cattle, we teamed up with a former competitor, the wolf. And this wasn't about livestock, it was a partnership. It was about collaboration.
Just look at this timeline for a second. The time scale is it's mind-boggling. We're talking about a process that could have started over 30,000 years ago. From the first hints in the genetic code to actual fossils of dogs being buried with humans, all the evidence shows that this alliance is ancient. It happened thousands of years before farming was even a thing. So how did it happen? Well, one of the coolest theories out there is that, in a way, dogs chose us first. It's this idea of self-domestication. The wolves that were a little bolder, a little less aggressive, and weren't afraid to get close to human camps to scavenge for scraps, they got more food. And over generations, that trait got passed down. They basically tamed themselves, which opened the door for us to build a real partnership.
And here's a really neat way to understand the technical side of what happened. It's a concept called flight distance. For a wild wolf, that's how close you can get before it bolts, and it can be more than 50 meters. But for a domesticated animal, it shrinks to less than 10. That single change in distance represents a complete rewiring of an animal's brain, a technological shift from pure fear to something like trust.
So what this shows us is that there wasn't just one technology for domestication. There were at least two. The dog came about through the commensal pathway. It was totally unintentional at first and grew out of mutual benefit. But to solve the bigger problem of hunger, we invented a whole new method, the prey pathway. And this approach was different. It was intentional, it was targeted, and it was about to spark the next great human revolution.
Okay, so with the dog as our hunting partner and an early alarm system, we turned our attention to the next massive challenge, solving hunger once and for all. And that meant taking the animals we used to hunt and bring them directly under our control, turning them into a living, breathing, reliable food source.
And unlike the super slow burn of dog domestication, when we started taming livestock, it happened in what feels like a blink of an eye. Right as the last ice age was ending, boom, communities all across the Fertile Crescent and beyond just started doing this, almost all at once. First sheep, then goats, then pigs, then cattle. Each one was a new technological breakthrough that made human survival that much more certain.
And you really can't overstate how valuable these first livestock animals were. Take the goat, one of the very first. The ancient Assyrians called it the poor man's cow. And that little phrase says it all, right? It was this tough, adaptable little animal that gave regular families everything they needed to survive. Milk, meat, leather. It was a lifeline.
So, how'd they actually do it? Well, the prey pathway was this deliberate three-step technology. Step 1, you hunt the animal. But then, step 2, instead of just killing them all, you start to manage the wild herds, kind of guiding them. And then the final game-changing step, selective breeding.
we started actively choosing which animals got to reproduce. You know, the calmer ones, the ones that gave more milk or had thicker wool. We began to literally engineer these species to better suit our needs.
And that brings us to the ultimate impact, because solving the food problem wasn't the end of the story. Oh no, it was just the beginning. This new technology, this partnership with animals, it didn't just fill our stomachs, it completely rebuilt human society from the ground up.
Just look at this chain reaction. Once you have a stable food supply, you can stop wandering and build villages. More food means you can support more people, so populations explode. And maybe most important, when not everybody has to spend all day looking for food, you get specialization. You get craftspeople and leaders and soldiers. You get surplus food, which kicks off trade and economies. And control over all those resources, that creates social classes. Literally every single pillar of our civilization rests on this foundation.
And get this, our ancestors weren't just guessing, they developed these incredibly smart systems to manage it all. A lot of nomadic cultures lived by what's called the 5 livestock balance. It wasn't just about having animals, it was about having the right mix of animals for the job. Horses for speed, camels for hauling stuff through the desert, cows for plowing fields. It was like a complex, living portfolio management strategy.
So animals became way more than just food. They became living engines. Pack animals like horses and camels were the technology that powered the very first global supply chains. They connected empires, they moved goods across entire continents, and they allowed for an exchange of ideas on a scale that was just unimaginable before. And this partnership became so deep, so fundamental to who we were, that it wove itself into our deepest beliefs. Sheep became symbols of peace. Cattle were worshipped as gods. The act of sacrificing an animal became a central religious ritual. Our relationship with these animals literally shaped our stories, our morals, and how we understood our place in the universe.
So in the end, this ancient technology, this alliance we forged between species, is what allowed humanity to go from just surviving to actually thriving. It was the solution to the age-old problems of uncertainty and scarcity, and it unleashed all the forces that created our cities, our economies, and our empires. This partnership built our entire world, which leaves us with a pretty big question. What will it build for our future?